this is a pretty big development here. This was something that caught my eye. Teamsters leader lands speaking slot at Republican convention at GOP convention, Politico reports. Teamsters Union General President Sean O'Brien will be a guest at the Republican National Convention next month with a speaking role that sharply contrasts with other labor leaders' embrace of President Joe Biden. Former President Donald Trump announced the appearance by O'Brien, whose union hasn't made an endorsement yet, on his social media platform. Sean O'Brien, the general president of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, has accepted my invitation to speak at the RNC convention in Milwaukee. Our great convention will unify Americans and demonstrate to the nation's working families they come first. When I am back in the White House, the hardworking Teamsters and all working Americans will once again have a country they can afford to live in and be respected around the world. Sean, I look forward to seeing you represent the Teamsters in Milwaukee. Together, we can make America great again. A spokesperson for the Teamsters confirmed that O'Brien will participate in the GOP convention and has made an identical request to appear at the Democrats' convention in Chicago the following month in August. So just so we are certain on these details, this is not an endorsement of Donald Trump. He is shopping around to try and get the best deal, as union leaders, I guess, are supposed to do. So this is not him endorsing Donald Trump. It's rather him saying, hey, I want to speak to your people and I want to speak to the Democrats' people, and then we'll go from there. But as this quote says, this is true. This is truly unprecedented, since it will be the very first time a Teamsters general president has addressed the RNC, Cara Denise said in a statement. Our 1.3 million members represent every political background, and their message needs to be heard by as wide an audience as possible, and that includes all political candidates running for elected office. We appreciate former President Trump's openness to inviting a labor leader to speak on behalf of working families. Long a Democratic mainstay, the Teamsters have sought to make inroads with the GOP this election cycle. The union held listening sessions with several Republican presidential candidates, including Trump, following a personal appeal from O'Brien. And the union's political arm has given thousands to both the RNC and the DNC. At the same time, O'Brien has had heated exchanges with anti-union Republican lawmakers, most notably on multiple occasions during congressional hearings with Senator Mark Wayne Mullen that risked turning physical. The Teamsters are perhaps the most politically influential of the handful of national labor unions that have yet to endorse a presidential candidate, and O'Brien said they intend to announce their choice sometime after this summer's convention. So, Obviously not a commitment one way or the other, but the fact that the Teamsters president is appearing at the RNC says quite something. It speaks to, if there's a pattern on this stream, this is sort of a bit of a look in the rearview mirror, a bit of a trip down memory lane, a little bit of a nostalgic show this evening, if there is one theme here. And the theme is, how did the Democrats get to this place? How did the Democrats get to a place where the Teamsters president is shopping around and he's going to go butter up the RNC? Just the fact that it's not a done deal by this point in the year, heading into July of an election year, with Donald Trump, the guy who shits in gold toilets, opposing the Democratic Scranton Joe, right? The idea that he is shopping around speaks volumes to how detached the Democrats have become from labor, that this would even be a question.
Well, speaking of memory lane, this story definitely reminded me of the article I wrote about how we'd be better off infiltrating the Republican Party. And it was kind of a thought experiment, but kind of not. My argument was basically, if you were going to stay in two-party politics, you would probably have a better chance of infiltrating and impacting the Republican Party than you would the Democratic Party. And the fact that Trump was able to win in their primaries, unlike Bernie, demonstrates that. Like, they did not rig it against him because they're afraid of their voters in a way that Democrats are not. It's funny. They used to have the saying, Democrats fall in love and Republicans fall in line. It's quite the opposite, actually. It's
Yeah,
quite the
now it
opposite.
is. Yep.
But part of my argument was, hey, it's not the first time the parties have switched what class they serve. The New Deal era, the Democrats were the party of the Confederacy. They were the party. They were the Dixiecrats, and because in the urban centers they pulled in a lot of immigrant groups, and also because of the Western expansion, they wound up flipping their bases with the Republicans. So who's to say that can't happen again? And I would argue that it's almost inevitable that it does, because you've had the working class gradually drifting into the Republican Party since Reagan. So how long can the Republican Party have a working class base that it ignores and doesn't serve economically? Especially given that this is a party that's more sensitive to issues of ignoring their voters.
Well, yeah, and the parallel to that is how long can the union leadership remain out of step with its rank and file? So we got a guy on
Right.
Rumble here says, I think it shows a change in the rank and file. Yeah, I
That
think that's
too.
absolutely true.
Sure.
I don't know Sean O'Brien. I haven't studied his career, all that well. But given the fact that there was that very tested, that very sort of testy exchange with the GOP, was it a senator, I think, or he was a senator or a congressman a while back. I think it's pretty safe to assume that his loyalties at the end of the day probably lie more with the Democrats than the Republicans. But as this chat says, when your rank and file start drifting to the Republicans, it's no longer tenable to just automatically side with the Democrats every time an election year comes around, because you're going to get too much shit from the rank and file, right? So this is really an indication that the base of the unions are now becoming more in line with, and this is not true as a majority yet, as of now, probably, but they're certainly drifting more into the GOP. That was a trend that started under Reagan and accelerated greatly in 2016, and is probably, as we're going to see, would not shock me if exit polls start coming in on election night this year, seeing an even further shift amongst union rank and file into the base of Trump. And that is almost certainly why Sean O'Brien has to appear like he is vetting both candidates. Like I said, I don't know this. I don't know the man. I haven't studied his life as much as some people might have. But I would, if I had to bet everything I own, I would bet Sean O'Brien himself more sympathetic to Biden than Trump. But the fact that he can't come out and endorse is evidence of that shift at the rank and file that we've been witnessing.
Well, it's been decades since the Democrats had anything but contempt for working class people.
Exactly.
This is where there's a lot of debate about how much culture matters. I think it matters a lot. I think when you have a Democratic Party whose cultural posturing is completely contemptuous of working class people, and in spite of all of their virtue signaling about being anti-racist, in a demonstration, a lot of people say when you look at things from a class perspective, it's class reductionist. Well, you know what? As the working class drifts towards Trump, guess who they're taking with them? Non-white working class people. There's a common class perspective there that no matter who you are, whatever identity group you affiliate with, your class identity is drawing people to Trump. Now, this, I would really recommend a video by almost friend of the show, Thomas Frank, why Hillary Clinton lost. I've mentioned it many times. It's about a 10-minute video. It's an interview he did with a French magazine, and he lays all this out. He says, the Democrats wanted to be the party of the wired workers, of the elites, of the very smart people, of the more suburban, wealthy, professional class set, and they thought that the working class had no place else to go. And Donald Trump, the secret sauce with Donald Trump was that he was really the first Republican to come out and capitalize on this. He was the first one to speak the language and start questioning these trade deals. Republicans never do this. And that's why the Democrats were able to maintain their advantage. Because in the end, you're running against Mitt Romney. It's a layup. It's easy. Right. The working class is going to rally to fucking Bain Capital, Mitt Romney. Right. Donald Trump goes up there, and whatever his sins as a businessman, he spoke the language. That's what I always say is most remarkable to me about Donald Trump, because he was to the manner born, but he sounds like a guy from a bar in Queens. Yeah, maybe George Bush says he liked to talk to the roughnecks and the oil rig guys, so one would assume that's how he got that in his ear, to sound folksy that way, even though he's from as patrician a family as you could be born to. Maybe Trump liked to talk to the guys on the job site because he talks like one, and that's it. That's the whole key to his success. He is speaking in this working class language that, because the Democrats have very, very systematically gotten rid of their working class over decades, with malice, with absolute disgust and contempt for everything they stand for. They don't have anyone who can speak that language anymore. That's why they're fucking shooting Biden up with vitamins or whatever the fuck they're doing to keep this guy alive, because he's one of the last guys who can kind of talk that shit. Can kind of capture that aesthetic.
Yeah,
once he's gone,
Uncle Joe shit. Yeah,
who the hell do they have who can even talk that shit?
No, nobody. I mean, literally nobody that I can think of. Not Newsom, not Whitmer. Nobody. No. I just had a great idea. Now, this is to say this is extremely unlikely to happen is probably an overstatement. But what if we invited Thomas Frank to our election night live show and had him sit in with us all night as Trump wins? That would be the most amazing content ever. Like, that would be one of the best streams in the history of YouTube.
We get him, we get Norm.
That would be great. Could you imagine doing an election night live stream and Trump wins with Thomas Frank on the panel? That would be so much fun.
That would be pretty epic.
It would just be so much fun because he's such a nice man. You know, he's a very nice guy with a sense of humor, but he's going to be, a little bit, what's the word? Verklempt that night. Yeah, and that would make for a lot of fun. That would actually be a lot of fun. It might even be worth doing it in DC. If he said I would come if you did it in DC, we should probably move the show to DC. I think we can fill 60 seats in DC. I think we could do that. If we can get Thomas Frank to be there, that would just be too big to pass up.
We could fill 60 in DC, but we could fill 200 in New York at the bitter end.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know, man. Thomas Frank. Imagine sitting at a table with Thomas Frank watching these returns come in.
Yeah. Well, any chance of that flew with your rant about the country.
That would just be a really great time. Indeed.
You should have thought of that before.
Yeah, I didn't think of it at the time. Yeah, at the time, that's true. If we had those plans in the works at the time, maybe I'd have been more careful.
Please clap.